All right, so Dan, let's go to you. You know, we spent a lot of we spent a little bit of time discussing, you know, threat intelligence and the value propositions associated with that. I want to give you a chance here to share some of your thoughts, and let's.
Well, this is something that both Arbor and probably AT&T get asked about all the time, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, visibility into very large networks, visibility into lots of malware, lots of botnets, you know, monitoring overall internet health, right? So we have lots of data, and of course, everybody, once you have data, everybody wants their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And what I've noticed in the industry in general is, of course, making up for so many of the shortcomings of the technology that's been around for some time. You know, you follow best practices and defense in depth, and everybody ends up looking alike. And now the industry seems to be pointing them in the direction of, okay, now that you've bought all that stuff from us, now we have this new thing called threat intelligence. And, you know, in most cases, that's another big blacklist.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, just like all of your signatures and all the other things, now we have IPs and domains and URLs and even SSL certs, and you just can keep going, right? And so now it's, okay, well, now you need to shove all this stuff into a SIM or a big Hadoop cluster, and you need to learn to do your own big data storage and access, and the question is, for what? To what end?
Right.
You can say, oh yeah, we're doing threat intelligence, but has it made you any more intelligent? And that's the question. In many respects, it seems as though, yes, you're making, you've got tons of intelligence wrapped up in your data storage. You've got machines that are smarter, but the issue is, I think the real mission, what we'd like to accomplish, I think everyone, is how do I tie my internal internet to the external internet to have context as to how they're interacting and where the risk and danger is. And so right now that is, okay, shove all of our internal events in one place and then shove all the external stuff into the same place and see if we can corroborate any better than we could before.
Right, right.
The problem is the internet is very large, and, you know, whatever percentage of it is bad, and whatever percentage you're interacting with. And so if you just have tons and tons of data and none of it actually has any interaction with your network, then you wasted a bunch of time and storage on, something that has nothing to do with your network or your environment.
You're right. Well, I think it even goes beyond that. You know, there's this big promise of threat intelligence sharing.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-way, you know, I share with you and you share with me and we're all done.
Yeah.
We all have different perspectives, and so this notion of, you know, all these different groups sharing, and, well, I'm going to share this stuff with you, but you can't share it with that guy. And so we end up with this, all of these, you know, this tangled web.
Yeah.
Forgive the you know, analogy, but it ultimately does become a tangled web. So that becomes and as it is now, you've been referring to data. It's not even data today. It's emails, it's hearsay, it's, you know, some little, you know, pamphlet or something, and you have to extract the pieces of it and try to develop some context around it.
It's interesting. I think if you asked us all historically what has worked, and this is true, I think, of whether you're talking in the ISP world or whether you're talking security industry. And the ISP world, I think, is a great example of this, right? So much of it is based on handshake agreements and the fact that the same people have been monitoring and running and helping the internet be what it is for years and years. Yeah. And you know everyone, and exchange of information is easy because of that. It's actually, you know, if the average person at home knew how many people are really involved in running the internet, it's much smaller than they probably think, right?
True.
But that works.
It's definitely
Trust groups actually work really well.
Yeah, they do.
You know, if you looked at what Microsoft did with the Configure Working Group, one of the few examples of the security industry getting something right. You know, when again, you know, internet community sharing things, handshake agreements, trust groups work. Now you start to look at things like what Obama recently announced with, oh, you guys should all share more, or you look at formats like Sticks and Taxi, and it's, okay, we want to push everyone to do it, and then everyone's stuck saying, okay, well, we can only share this or we can only share that. And what is still working in terms of real, the meat of exchange is still occurring, I think, with the trust groups. And so the question is, what is the value when you are forcing the kids on the playground to play with each other, so to speak?
All right.
That value, I think, will have to be measured, and really, you know, we've got to see whether that actually works and at what level that works. Because what we do know works, I think, is the trust groups. Right, the ISACs and that sort of thing, and you know, there's a reason why things are TLP, you know, based, because you need to be able to trust when you provide information that it's not going to the wrong place, that it's going to the right place, and it will be used in the right way. And that, I think, from an Arbor standpoint, maybe from an AT&T standpoint, is oftentimes so much of your challenge. I would love to give you the information. I have to be able to trust that it won't be used for, bad purposes.
Yeah.
Which side of the force are you on?
Right. Yeah. True. And for anybody that's not already familiar, TLP that Dan referred to here, that's Traffic Light Protocol, which is a relatively simple and very effective way to basically determine to what extent you can share information. So basically, I think white means you can share it.
Green,
stick
yellow,
it on
red,
the
I
internet.
think, yeah.
And then green basically allows you to share it relatively broadly, but not post it on the internet.
Yeah,
And
there you
then yellow says you can share it within your organization and perhaps to others if you get permission to do that from the originator. And then red meaning you can't really share it, and so hopefully you can use it if you're the direct participant in a group. And so it's I think this came out of FIRST originally.
I believe so, yeah.
And it's been adopted by a number of other groups. Really, I think a well-crafted idea, although most systems don't think that way. We think back in the security controls, we tend to think in terms of mandatory access controls and discretionary access controls.
Right.
We don't have a traffic light protocol control built into any systems today. So I think that's part of what's happening is, Matt's looking at me here because I know he's been working on this for our activities, and is pulling his hair out from time to time trying to figure out how we implement this in a system. It's a little more difficult in a system because you still have to track the attribution or the ownership of the information and determine to what scope you can share.
From my perspective, threat intel, it has its ups and its downs. I've seen great data. I've seen really, really bad data as well. And I think we're still in our infancy of being able to share not only the indicators, but find a way to say these indicators are fresh, not fresh, reliable, not reliable, and then make informed decisions based on that, and not just like a score from 1 to 10 of whether or not I worry about this or not.
Well, you just nailed it. The problem with so much of the threat intel historically has been a total lack of metadata. You told me that's bad. Why is it bad?
Why is it bad?
Yeah, and then
And if it's bad for you, does that necessarily mean it's bad for
Is
me?
it a threat to my vertical or
Yeah.
And so funny enough, we can trust each other more than the machines, which is
It's still a ways to
it's
go
a
with
bit
the
of a
machines.
I don't know if we're trying to prevent the Terminator
Prevent the
scenarios,
rise of the
right?
machines,
I'm more worried about preventing us using it in some sort of automated improper fashion. Where someone has seen something in their honeypot, it gets fed into my IDS or into my firewalls, and all of a sudden I'm blocking a significant number of customers.
Well, and I like that you just brought up
Tossing
honeypots
ourselves.
too, because this is the fallacy of the security industry. What happened, I think, is everybody discovered, putting together honeypots is pretty easy. Deploying them out, pretty easy. Oh, look at all of the information we get. And let's shove that into a new service called Threat Intel.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
It's not that hard.
If you don't mind, I'm going to make a qualification here. It's been a long time motto of mine: too much information, not enough, or excuse me, too much data, not enough information. You can definitely collect data with honeypots.
That's right.
Information is another matter. You really have to put it into context and consider, is this a false positive?
And that's another promise of threat intel that I'm still kind of wavering about is at some point, someone said, we have all this information, we should be able to throw it into a big data, system and get really good information out of it. That we can say, okay, we've seen this over the last 5 years. Now we know this ASN is the trouble. It's not just this IP and that IP over here and this IP, or it's this whoage registrant we need to nail down or something like that. So.
And I think that becomes the fundamental issue, right? Regardless of whether you're a vendor, whether you're an enterprise or ISP or whatever, regardless of whether you're talking, storing it in a SIEM or a Hadoop cluster or whatever level of corroboration, or whether the next step is machine learning, it's still fundamentally garbage in, garbage out. And if you are building something to make decisions based on poor or questionable or mediocre data, you're still going to get mediocre decisions being made. And I think is a question you have to be asking yourself, judging yourself, assessing yourself. I just want to pull in a bunch of data from different sources and see if things improve. The Vegas odds, I don't know, are going to be with that line of thinking.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. But okay, so I think the undertone of this is that there's still a lot of maturity that's needed in the threat intelligence space. That the notion still has some promise, but it's an experiment at this stage. And I guess
I'd say a buzzword at this stage.
it's
right?
definitely a buzzword.
Right.
Buzzword.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I think we've gotten some good value from threat intelligence, but
Yeah.
as it is today, it's a very labor-intensive activity.
Yeah, I would agree.
And the promise of automation around that, we wouldn't be investing in it if we didn't see some promise in it.
Yeah.
I know Matt spends a lot of time, trying to get his arms around some of the challenges here, but I think there's opportunity here, and
Yeah.
it's a matter of really sort of optimizing, getting the value from it and not expecting it to be that it's not going to be a panacea. It helps.
Yeah, well, and again, it's one of those situations where it is a buzzword, and of course, these industries are famous for those. And you see those every couple of years, and everybody jumps on the bandwagon. The point of the bandwagon is, yeah, sure, the fundamental ideas are good, right? Just like cloud was good, and virtualization was good, and mobile's good, right? Those terms come, and we all jump on them. But the point is, where are you wanting to end up? And is your strategy of taking in a ton of data going to get you there? And so many times it's, well, everybody else is doing it, so let's go try it and see if it works for
Right.
us. It should probably be a little bit more deliberate than I think historically, some of these buzzwords and bandwagons have been.
This is true.
Yeah, because cloud and mobile, those are no-brainer. Virtualization, no-brainer, right?
Well, and in fact, I think to your point, and this is actually one of the things that has been a bit of a concern of ours, is that there's been so much emphasis around threat intelligence sharing that it seems to have overtaken the notion of actually improving inherent security solutions and actually architecting so that we have better security.
Thank you for vocalizing exactly what I've been trying to say. You just nailed it.
That's absolutely true.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad we agree.
Yeah.
Although it's no good for the debate portion of this. It's
No, but I mean that's a perfect wrap up of exactly what I was trying to get to. Yeah, it's a hey, I love fashion, but make sure that it's more than a trend, and you're going to get something out of it.
Yeah, they're absolutely complementary. I think one of our clear observations is the more and more. There have been, I'm not going to say less, but fewer of the real concerns are really kind of buried down at the network level. That more and more what we're seeing are attacks against the applications themselves. And the policy is intended to allow access to the applications. And so, the analogy I tend to think of or I tend to use is just password guessing. Is that when we consider how an application is intended to be used, just an authentication interface, we expect a username to be put in, a password to be put in, and if they did it right, they get access to the application. If they don't do it right, they get basically rejected. And if they're trying to guess, they get kicked out after a few guesses. But now the trend is, okay, well, instead of doing it just guessing usernames and passwords, how about we just go across all the usernames and guess a handful of passwords? It's a new paradigm that we hadn't thought of previously.
Or interact with the application that doesn't require authentication.
Right, and so interact in it in a way that you hadn't anticipated the application to be used for.
You're a site that hosts large PDFs for loan documents or insurance or whatever. Well, they're multi-meg. What happens if I download a bunch of them? And there's no authentication stopping me from doing that. What if I download a bunch of them from a lot of different zombies on the internet?
Right, yeah.
What happens to your application then?
Yeah, exactly.
And that had nothing to do with all the other aspects of your website, like the pipe that's coming in or your edge devices protecting and connecting it. And I think that's kind of the scenario, again, going back to the way we thought about things in the 90s, right? You'd walk through your DMZ and you'd say, oh, that's the web server over there, and it had a little www sticker on it, right? And so you'd point to it and say, oh, that's the web server. And now it's okay. It's the pipe coming in from your ISP or likely multiple ISPs, all your edge devices, the server or servers or cloud environment that it's hosted in, and then the application and maybe even back-end systems, right? So from an attacker standpoint, I've got like 8 different things to go after. It's not just the box in the corner that used to be.
Right.
And so you've got to be thinking that the attack surface is larger than you probably historically would have felt it.
Yeah.
And just going back to DDoS, for instance, right? Most people look at that as a pure networking problem. And I'll tell you from my personal standpoint, and I think many others out there, the networking aspect of DDoS is not what really scares us. It's the application level aspect. That is one of the things it shows you is that the attacker really cares. And DDoS is generally made up of attackers that don't care that much. But when you're going after the application, it really shows some dedication that they want you and
They have to know something about that
That's right.
application
That's
in
right.
order to do it.
And so that tells you something
right.
about the attacker versus, oh, somebody launched a SYN flood, right? Because the barrier to entry for a SYN flood is quite low. Barrier to entry to attack my application, a lot higher.
Yeah, I think, so just to sort of close out on this threat intel aspect of it, I think at least where I've seen very good value is first, I think what you were just alluding to is that contextual aspect.
Yep.
That is to have some notion of, to some extent, at least some loose attribution to be able to say, is this a targeted activity that I really need to be paying attention to, or is it sort of just the I don't care too much kind of activity that's taking
I think
place?
you've got to ask yourself, who is going to be my audience, right? And you really have two different audiences here. You want to be able to enable your incident responders as well as much as you can. How can I not just make everybody smarter? What's the reason to make people smarter? And I think it's to make people more efficient, right? I only have so much staff with so much skill set, with this much turnover, right? And I have these many things coming in. And again, the barrier to entry for the attacker, right, there's way more attackers than I have incident responders. So how do I make them as good as possible, right? That would be the point of threat intelligence.
Yep.
And then at the management layer, how do I not get my CISO, fired, which happens all the time, right? Or how am I, as the CISO, not going to get fired? And I think that's why look at how many companies that are now putting in place CROs, Chief Risk Officers. So you've got to be able to assess risk at both.
Spread it out.
Yeah. Not only spread it out, but I think you've got to be able to understand the risk at the lowest level and at the highest level, right? The fact that we partnered with or are sponsoring a sporting event, did that put us in any risk, right? Because your incident responders are not thinking about that, but they might be responding to the malware or the DDoS event that triggered because of something maybe an executive said or something you sponsored or some partnership you did or some decision as a company you made.
Right.
And those worlds right now, probably not all that connected. And threat intelligence, whether that's human or machine, that it should be, I think, affecting those areas of risk assessment.
That's a good point. I think generally the legal teams have focused on considering risk from a legal point of view.
That's a great point, yeah.
But we haven't really deliberately put somebody in the position to say, looking at it from an illegal point of view. That is, to what extent?
Or just who's your, as I like to say, who's your one neck to choke in terms of company risk, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why this CRR role is becoming more popular because who is connecting the dots? And at the end of the day, right, only the CEO is the person connecting those dots because all those things end up eventually rolling to you. Whereas, you're right, you've got legal, you've got, InfoSec, IT, you've got employee, HR. There's a lot of risk that has to be assessed and managed every single day in a company.
Yeah.
And that might be why that role has kind of come around and become more popular, is because people have realized in the modern day, managing that risk is actually one of the primary functions of a company of any magnitude or size at this point.